Hello and welcome to our show, Great Britain in Focus. I'm James McCullough.
And I'm Pascal Mary Rakovich. In this episode, we discover why a bishop near the very top of the Anglican hierarchy decided to convert to Rome.
We hear the remarkable story of a teenager's life of holiness and how, since his death, he has left a legacy of grace in his hometown.
And we join James McCullough in conversation with Joanna Bogle as they take up their history tour with the Norman conquest and its huge impact on the Church in England. In a somewhat surprising event, Dr. Gavin Ashenden, formerly an Anglican bishop and chaplain to the Queen, was received into the Roman Catholic Church in December 2019. In this interview with Kevin Turley, Dr. Ashenden describes why he became a Catholic and recounts his very unusual spiritual journey, showing how the Holy Spirit has worked throughout his life.
Yes, we discover how he moved from being, in his words, an archetypal progressive intellectual Anglican towards increasing orthodoxy because of his growing discomfort with current Anglican theology, thereby setting him on a collision course with the Anglican establishment.
Sounds like a remarkable journey.
Yes, well it was. Let's listen to what they have to say.
Dr. Atchison, I presume.
Mr. Turley, I think.
Correct.
How nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. It's so nice to meet you in Walsingham, of all places.
Wonderful to be here. And as part of my journey into the Catholic Church has been directed by a growing love and recognition of what Our Lady has done and who she is.
This is perhaps the only Marian shrine which has an Anglican and a Catholic dimension to it.
As far as I know, it has, although of course the Anglicans would say that theirs is a Catholic dimension, and at the heart of that lies a tragic story, I think, which is that Anglicanism has within it a memory of its inheritance, and from time to time people have tried to reactivate that memory, resuscitate perhaps that spirituality. And so a number of people, Newman is obviously the most obvious example, and then I would say 150 years later I was caught up in the same project, trying to see whether or not there is a Catholic soul to Anglicanism. The reason I'm here now is because, as with Newman, I found that there was no soul that was capable of resuscitation, and therefore you have to, after a while, rather like a patient who's had a heart attack on a slab, you have to put the electric paddles down and go to where there's life, not death.
To take that a little bit further maybe, Gavin, is there a way in which it's waiting for some form of resurrection?
You can only have resurrection if you repent. You can't have it on your own terms.
That's true. And I guess there's 500 years standing between us and that repentance.
Well, I think behind it lies a kind of mistaken instinctive love of Greek philosophy. The Greeks always thought we had a natural right to a permanent, perpetual soul, and that idea has undermined Christianity often, to the point where we think we have a right to resurrection. But our Lord will only raise to life that which is given to him. And I think one of the things that Walsingham does is to challenge those who come here to ask whether or not what we bring we're willing to give to him. And the problem with Anglicanism at the moment, and I'm sorry to say this, I don't mean to be unkind or in any way vengeful. In fact, it's an utter tragedy, is that if the Church of England had given itself to God on his terms, it could have been resurrected, but it would only have been to become Catholic. In other words, it went on a journey, and the question is, was the boomerang willing to come back or not? But in fact, it has gone away. Only by coming back could it have been resurrected. So my heart and my soul are stirred to bits by your mentioning the possibility, but we don't get unconditional resurrection. It's conditional on being attached to Jesus and being obedient. I was born in the same year as St. Augustine. So I was born in 54. And I discovered Augustine was born in 354, and I said, well, my dear friend, I'd already come to love him and know him a bit. I love the way Augustine's mind works, and I love the way his heart works. And so I would wave at him and say, born in the same year, you know, brothers in the century, whatever. And then, of course, as I gained a greater sense of perspective on Augustine's life, I realized that as he died at the death of a civilization.
Yes.
And although he knew the resurrection of Christ in his own life and in his own heart and in his soul, and as he struggled to purify the church from heresies that would have grievously wounded her, nonetheless, he died at a moment of darkness and entropy, where the Vandals and the pagans were battering at the gates. I'm aware of the character of the Vandals, but nonetheless, that's a historical footnote. And it just occurred to me a couple of decades ago, what if the parallels between your life and Augustine's are more than you thought they were? Is it remotely possible that as you become an old man, your culture dies at the same time you are? And if so, will you be living a life sufficiently parallel to want to go on learning the lessons he learned? And at the moment, with the way culture is going, we're on target. One of the reasons for keeping away from the authentic spirituality is that if you go too close to it, you're going to have to deal with this terrible mess that always emerges. I spent about 20 years as a Jungian. I gave up deliberately because I couldn't tell the difference anymore between holiness and madness. And so taking refuge in psychology and Jung was an easy way out. And I would have stayed there if it hadn't been for demonic attacks.
But somebody said that Jung, dismissing the whole Jungian world, which is a lot harder to do for some religious people than Freud, for example. But he said, supping with the devil with a long spoon.
Freud was a direct antagonist, and
Correct.
Jung was a subtle mimic. And so it's much easier to deal with a direct antagonist. But the subtle mimic was and is profoundly problematic. And of course what's actually happened is the whole of our culture is now based on Jungian presuppositions, which mimic Christian ones, which is why all our progressive enemies keep on using our language in terms of people developing their full potential, justice, equality, balance, all the stuff, the mimic language of the kingdom, which means that we then have a really serious job to try and reclaim the concepts with more accurate language, and not enough people are trying to do that. But until we can do that, we can't help our culture escape from this net, this spiritual dark net that's been flung over it by Jung.
If you start putting our culture through that cipher, it's really interesting.
Well, I hate to say it, but one of the reasons I stopped being an Anglican was because I decided that Anglicanism was counterfeit. It was derivative and counterfeit. Did it always have to be? Well, Newman hoped not, Pusey thought not, but now, for sure, it has become that. Whether it always was, I don't know.
This is fascinating, Gavin, and it's so interesting to be talking about these kind of spiritual fault lines in a place like Walsingham. I'd like to take you to the EWTN studio, which is just in the centre of the village here.
Wonderful.
For no other reason than the night is drawing in.
It is.
And we need the light of the eternal word to guide us home.
In our next piece, Alan Wilson speaks to Kevin Turley about the life and faith of his son, Joe Wilson, who died aged 17 from a rare undiagnosed heart condition. Filmed at Carfin Grotto, the national Marian shrine in Scotland, where Joe would spend many hours both alone and with his family, this programme reveals an unusually strong faith in one so young.
Yes, he was a very prayerful person who lived his faith openly, loving others without exception, so that the night before he died, whilst he lay in a coma, several hundred people spontaneously gathered at the shrine in a candlelit prayer vigil. His father describes how there is now a growing devotional following of Joe and how he leaves a lasting legacy for those who knew him, as well as touching the hearts of those who are coming to know about his life.
It's a very moving story, so let's take a look.
I've come today to Scotland's National Marian Shrine here at Carfin to meet Alan Wilson, to talk about his son Joseph, who died aged 17, but still leaves a lasting legacy amongst the people with whom he lived. Alan, pleased to meet you.
Hi Kevin, how are you? Welcome to Carfin.
Thank you. Now, I've come today to talk to you about Joe, and tragically you lost Joe how many years ago?
That's now 8 years ago. His anniversary was actually just yesterday.
What year was he born?
Joe was born in 1994, 12th of December. And if you speak to anyone about Joe, his friends, his neighbours, even teachers, anyone he had contact with, you would get exactly the same story from him. He was such an engaging young chap, polite, I've got to say handsome.
Yes.
But he was very tall, 6'2". But he was the kind of person, when you were talking with him, no matter who you were, he would find something to talk to you about. You would feel as if you were the only person in the world at that point in time. Mm-hmm. He really had, he just captured you. But he didn't impose his personality on you. He was more interested in you, and to find out what you were like and your interests and whatnot. And he was also very devout in his faith. A lot of folk ask me the question, where does he get that faith from? And it was inherent in him. A few examples, if we go back to primary school, and if I think of the first parents' evening we went, this is primary one, so this is Joe at 5 years of age. Mm-hmm. And his primary school teacher, Mrs. Henderson at the time, she said to us, your boy, there's just something really special about him. At playtime, he goes out and he just looks around the playground and he sees who's not talking with anyone, who's not playing with anyone, who's not engaged, and he'll go over to them and make sure they're all right and get them involved in something or get them working. So that was very obvious from a very young age. But this is the place that we're in right now, the Carfin Grotto. It's, I've got to say, one of his favourite places. And he would come in a lot of times with his mother and just wander around as we're doing just now. Yep. And they'd be just chatting about the matters of the day and praying together and whatnot. He was a devotee of the rosary. Yes. So he would say the rosary often. And I recall Veronica will tell us quite often he would come home from school and he'd say, right mum, here's what's happened, come and say a rosary with me.
Really?
Or his favourite prayer was actually the Angelus.
So he was a man of prayer?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It was a sort of person, if we were talking and if you said to me, Kevin, my aunt's not well, or I've got, somebody that I know could do with some prayers and help, Joe wouldn't just log that in his mind, he would actually stop and say a prayer right there and then for them. Just as we're kind of instructed to do. But he lived his faith absolutely. He wore it in his sleeve. You just knew when you were talking to him, he was a man of God.
So it's fair to say, Alan, that Joe is still very much part of your family and always will be, I guess.
Oh yes. Well, the way I put that is, when your child is born, what do you feel? You feel elated and it's absolutely fantastic. It's the same when your child dies in the opposite direction. But also, when I think of Joe, you can go several ways with this when your child dies. You can go really down and depressed, and I'm not saying I don't get down and I don't get sad. Of course I do. Of course I do. It's a very natural thing to do. But the other thing I think of is, you always want your kids to be happy. No matter what they're doing, you just want them to be happy. So if I could talk to Joe just now and I could say to Joe, what would you like to do? Would you like to be here? Or would you like to be up there with God doing God's work? He'd tell me two things. He'd say, I love it up here doing God's work and I'm just so happy. Now, as a parent, what else do you want for your child? So that helps me personally when I'm in my lowest ebbs.
One of the things, Alan, about Joe is that, like St. Therese, he left a diary.
Yeah, I did. It was a pleasant surprise. I was preparing for a memorial service that the school were having, and I was looking for inspiration. And I went up to his room, and I was looking around, and I saw school jotters. So I thought, I'll look at his handwriting, and that'll make me think about Joe and whatnot. And I started flicking through the jotters, and I'm starting to read, and I'm saying, this isn't business studies. This is his life, you know, and diaries, and it's the life of a 14, 15, 16-year-old, but all the things that go on in your life at that time. But the thread that came right through it was talking about his faith, and how when he needed help, the number of times that he would turn to God, he would turn to Jesus, or typically he'd say, I've just prayed a decade of the rosary there, you know. So it was wonderful to find. Veronica and I had a conversation with Joe a week, 2 weeks before he died, and he said, as I said, he was looking to study medicine. He had applied for medicine. He said, look, I'm having a wee thought. He says, I really got a strong feeling that I want to help folk spiritually. And I can't help thinking that with God taking Joe, he's getting his wish. You know, he's impacting in a real positive way so many more people now than he ever could if he was here. So we've now set up Joe's Faith, which is basically using Joe as the example and holding devotional events. We've now held 4 devotional events, all here in Carfin, and there's almost 200 people been coming along to each event. The diversity of age group and people that are coming along. There are so many young people coming along. The wide range of personalities that you know Joe's inspiring are you know that are coming out to see Joe. It's really, really good. And we just, in the Joe's Faith group, it's nice to be able to bring some goodness to the world.
We now join James in conversation with Joanna Bogle as they continue their history of Christianity in Britain. They take up the story again with the state of Christianity in England at the time of the Norman conquest. We discover what happened to the Saxon people after the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and their resistance to the Norman invaders.
Yes, we discuss how both sides were devoutly Christian, but incredibly, the brutal suppression of the Saxon nation eventually led to a resurgence of Christianity in Britain. We see how the appointment of Norman bishops who reformed the church in England meant a stronger, more centralised place of the church in the political and social life of the nation.
Let's join our On Location team to follow the story.
We are continuing our series on the history of Christianity in Britain. So, Joanna, we are here in front of Binham Priory, one of the finest examples of Romanesque Norman architecture in Norfolk. This is, of course, unusual, this style of architecture. We don't see very much of it in the UK anymore. It came across with the Normans, or I should say, prior to the Normans. It was actually Edward the Confessor who summoned stonemasons from Normandy and brought them in 1042 to construct Westminster Abbey. Then we have examples after the conquest of York Minster, Durham Cathedral, New Salisbury Cathedral, all of which are built in the Romanesque style, and this continues till about 1170s when they brought in the Gothic style, but that's another story. So we're talking about the Normans in this particular program. Tell us a little bit about the Normans, their origin, what happened?
Well, the famous thing about the Normans is they conquered.
Absolutely.
They were Northmen, and they had settled for several generations in northern France. And the country they were going to conquer was Saxon and very Christian. By the time they conquered us, we were definitely one nation and had been for some while. From 925, we were one country, not lots of Saxon kingdoms, one country. And the first king of all England was King Athelstan, great supporter of the church. He is crowned at Kingston in Surrey, where he merged together the Wessex and Mercian kingdoms, crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury. We're now 925, we're now in a very, very Christian culture. The Saxons are Christian, the Vikings who've been invading them, whom they are still fighting, they become Christian across the sea. The Normans are Christian.
Yes.
And the Saxons, who were no great builders, are now wonderful builders. They're building churches and so on. Everything is really a Christian country.
We saw that the Saxon Round Tower in the last programme in this series, didn't we?
Yes, absolutely emblematic of Norfolk, and it's a Saxon church. So that Christianity is deeply embedded in the whole culture.
Yes.
We move on through the Saxon kings, get to Ethelred the Unready, which
right.
you must admit is a delicious name. Have we not often been unready, you know?
Yep.
But it actually means in context that he was ill-advised. It's almost a pun on his name of Ethelred, which means to be well-advised. And he marries Emma of Normandy.
Right.
By the time you get to Edward the Confessor, he is the last in a long line of Saxon and Viking kings who is completely Christian. And it's been a long while, many, many centuries since Augustine arrives in Kent.
Yes.
So we get to Edward the Confessor. Now, he builds, and you've just told us about this, the minster to the west of London on Thorney Island.
Yes.
And he grew up in Normandy. His mother is Norman.
Of course, yes.
And he marries, and that's fine, except that they have no children. So by the time he dies in 1066,
Right.
there's a problem.
There's no successor. Okay.
And there's a real tension here, because there is a Saxon king, a relation of Edward's wife, Harold. He's popular, and again, an athletic character, a good man, Christian, and he's busy fighting the Vikings. And the Godwinsons, he's Harold Godwinson, are very, very powerful, and they've grown up, the family gathering more land and so on. So he's got a reasonable claim to the throne. But did Edward, or did he not, promise the throne to William of Normandy?
Yes.
And thereby hangs the tension. And they meet in battle, William of Normandy with his troops, and Harold, rather tired, having marched his troops down south from Stamford Bridge.
Yes.
And they meet in battle at the place that is still called
Battle.
where a great abbey will in due course commemorate
Yes.
the site. And a stone there marks where poor Harold fell. So William has won. He has definitely won. Not because everybody wanted it, not because he was invited, but he's going to claim the throne. And it's the most definitive date in our history, isn't it?
It is, indeed. We all know that date.
We all know that date.
But what's unclear is what happened immediately afterwards.
It's a bit we don't know about, but you're going to start telling me.
Okay, let's explore. So, immediately after the Battle of Hastings, and William landed on the 28th of September in 1066, William gets crowned as king in coronation at Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day in that year, 1066. Now, almost immediately afterwards, he issues a writ to the people of London saying, don't worry, nothing's going to change. You will carry on your customs, your laws, everything will be just the same as it was under Edward the Confessor. Now, that was a great noble gesture to the Saxons, and the Saxons may have misinterpreted that. But actually, William has another motive, knowing that he's got 7,000 land and power-hungry troops behind him that he's brought from Normandy. These chaps, they want land in reward for the Battle of Hastings. So obviously the Saxons weren't going to stand for this, and they start rebelling. So it first happens around 1068, York. William responds, he sends up an army, puts down the rebellion, builds a nice big castle and garrisons it. Next year, same thing happens, 1069. This time, the Danes are invited to join in. So again, the Danes are almost coming to the rescue of the Saxons. Yeah, it's fascinating this, how it turns around. They, again, are put down by William's army. 1070, the third occasion. William goes up, crushes the rebellion. This time, he says, enough is enough. If we're going to defeat these people and stop the Danes, we're going to have to destroy everything that lives. Hence, we have something called the Harrying of the North, a horrible event. Anywhere north of the Humber, but focusing on Yorkshire, you've got everything that is living, cattle, sheep, pastures, all destroyed by the Norman army. William spares nothing. The idea is that nothing could support a rebellion again in that area. It's a message to the whole country. Don't rebel. We're serious about this. Of course, thousands die in the ensuing famine, which occurs as a result of this. So it's terrible.
So the whole system is there with the crown very definitely in charge.
Indeed, and so we see other reforms. The cathedrals moved from places like Dorchester into Lincoln.
Into a city.
Into cities.
Yes, I see.
To try and centralise the church.
And this goes on under Lanfranc, and then William I, William the Conqueror, dies and is succeeded by his son, whom we never seem to call William II. We call him
William Rufus.
Yes, and I don't know whether that's because he has a red beard or red hair, or whether it was ruddy cheeks, or one school of thought he had a red temper, shocking temper. We just don't know. Now, he actually has a different archbishop, and Anselm, who seems to have been quite a gentle, pious type, well, Rufus isn't. And as we know, he dies because he's shot.
Yes, in the New Forest.
In the New Forest, that's right.
That's right.
And the big question is, was it a hunting accident, which is what we charitably assume,
or was it murder?
The Conqueror really had got it all organised. His sons inherit, and the third is Henry, Henry the First. And this starts a new chapter, his marriage and his progeny. So the old rhyme goes well: William, William, Harry, Steve. Then we get back to Harry, Henry II.
Yes. Now, he was famous because he was a very strong king, but he also had the problem of Thomas à Becket.
Thomas à Becket. And the story of Henry II trying to control the archbishop, essentially, and the archbishop nobly standing up for the church's rights, this creates the new chapter, would you say, of history, where we move from the Normans into the medieval.
The proper medieval, yes, exactly. So this is when we see a bit of a threshold. Anyway, essentially, this marks the end of our Norman period. So what are we going to talk about next?
Well, we've got the whole of the High Middle Ages, James. Then we've got to go on to the Reformation.
Right, yes.
Thank you for joining us. Full versions of these interviews will be posted on our website at a later date. EWTN Great Britain is a self-funded charity, and we'd like to thank those who have generously supported us.
Please visit our British website ewtn.co.uk for further details on how to donate. We do appreciate your financial support to help us bring you great British programming. Do join us next time. Goodbye and God bless.